Welcome back, everyone, to our Back to School special here in 2020. Joined now by a very special guest, Mr. Larry Carter, the president of the Louisiana Federation of Teachers. Mr. Carter, thank you so much for your time. How are you these days?
Thank you, Chad, for having me on your show. I'm doing fine, and I'm just happy to be able to share our concerns with reopening schools.
So many concerns, so many questions, not enough answers, unfortunately, at this point as the new school year looms. What is the Federation's perspective, though, on the return to school, trying to do it safely, remotely, virtually, in different ways? But from the organization's standpoint, what's your biggest message today?
Our biggest message today is that when we reopen schools safely. And that's making sure that we look at the science behind reopening, and we talk about those things like social distancing, mandatory face masks, making sure that we have the necessary materials and resources to safely reopen schools. Sanitation will be key and important. And also, how do we look at those school districts that don't have the connectivity for their students and, or in some cases, their teachers, to do distance learning when we go to distance learning in an effective way. So we are certainly concerned about whether or not we have the actual resources to open schools safely and efficiently.
COVID-19, it's been unprecedented, and everyone continues to learn how to handle this situation. From your reaction, just from what you've been hearing from the community across the state, the beloved teachers that we have from north to south Louisiana, east to west, what are some of their biggest concerns and biggest challenges trying to, greatly impact our future students once again in a positive way?
I think the biggest concern is safely returning to school. Right now, it looks like when we did a poll of almost 15,000 people across the state, both teachers, school employees, parents, as well as community people in those different parishes across the state, there was a fear of returning because there was no assurance that we could safely return to schools, understanding that there was a funding need for PPE in terms of testing, and how do you then create spaces inside of schools that could allow to be social distance ready. And then let's talk about this issue of how do we actually educate kids with distance learning when so many of our kids may not have access to not just internet service, but strong enough internet service to be effective in terms of the teacher and student interaction. Ultimately, most of our teachers and school employees want to return to work. And parents, I think right now, when you poll them, they're really afraid to send their kids to school, as well as teachers who have kids and employees. And so it really is, how do we fund adequately opening schools safely is the key issue and concern. Can we do that, and do we have the resources to do that?
And Mr. Carter, you've been a long-time educator yourself here in Louisiana, spent many years in the classroom. We know the connection, that personal experience for students. Just in your opinion, sir, is at-home learning, distance learning, can it be just as effective? But at the same time, what do students miss out when you're not having that in-person instruction?
I think online or virtual teaching and learning is not as effective as in-person teacher and student bonding and connection. There has to be this socialization that you just can't get over the internet, and you just can't get from seeing someone on a video screen like we're doing today. I just think we have to make sure that when we reopen schools safely, and that's the biggest concern. I mean, we've polled teachers, we've polled school employees, we've polled parents, just like most of our districts have on some occasions. And it's just this fear of not knowing, because there's no true assurances that those protocols that was put in place, can they truly be followed if we don't have the funding to do that?
Mr. Carter, as we enter the 2020-2021 school year, what words come to mind just in terms of the biggest challenge that many of us have ever faced in the education system across the state, across the country, across the world? How would you describe what we're all about to embark on this year?
Look, I think right now with this unprecedented virus and its impact on our communities, our way of life, is causing people to decide their lives versus their livelihoods. It's causing parents to decide whether my child's life is more important than my child's education. And that is one of the most difficult things for a parent to have to decide. And I think as we get closer to a vaccine, people will feel more comfortable. I think as we find the resources necessary to appropriately and reopen schools safely, then we'll get those assurances where parents and school employees and the community feel safe with reopening schools right now. But for the most part, I think that's what I would leave you with, is that there's a sense of fear and anxiety that is overwhelming those of us who have to make those decisions about reopening schools or going to schools or sending our kids to school.
Such a tough situation. Mr. Larry Carter, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. We're all hoping for the best.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. I appreciate that.
Thank you, sir, and we'll have much more of our Back to School special right after this.